Hello and welcome to the Physiology of Endurance Running podcast. I'm Owain, joined as always by Dan. How are you doing, Dan?
Yeah, good, thanks. Good. Long day of life, but and we made it longer by recording a podcast at the end of it. But really excited to have our first guest on the show, and it was. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I really enjoyed recording it. I think we both just said, yeah, really enjoyable chat. Who did we have on, Owain?
So we had Maurten Thomas. Maurten is the performance nutritionist for Maurten. So we talk a lot about Maurten. Maurten has a master's in nutrition education from Columbia University in America. And she works with a range from elite athletes all the way down to people completing their first marathon. Just has really good insights into Maurten, good insights into performance nutrition. Like Dan said, this is really good. The entire way through, I was thinking like, I wish I could listen to this and not be driven mad by hearing my own voice.
If you tolerate your own voice. I mean, I still haven't listened to I've listened to snippets of what we've recorded, but I've never listened to one back. I just don't think I could do it. But maybe I will go back and listen to this one. Maybe it'll be a challenge.
Hopefully we put out a call for some questions. Hopefully we covered a lot of them. Really good.
Couldn't get to all of them. Sorry, we couldn't get to all of them. There were so many. It was, but
there might be a second.
Really, we're already talking about maybe around two. But yeah, really good to go. Yeah, listen to the rest of our podcasts. Let us know what you think. Before we get into that, we'll give a shout out to our podcast sponsor, Soar Running. So again, like, you must have come across Soar by now. Really high quality kit, really known for putting out really high spec, really nice to wear, comfortable, fast gear, which looks stylish too. I think another thing that we haven't mentioned before about Soar, which I really like, is they've properly invested in like the running community, and that there's so many Soar sponsored athletes. They've got like a trail team, a road team, an ultra team, and they really do seem to have bought into and invested in running, whereas many other brands, which they seem very aloof. Whereas with Soar, I feel like everybody seems to know somebody who works at Soar, is connected to Soar, that makes me want to support them, and made me even more grateful when they outreached to us saying, "Oh, we'd love to support your podcast."
Yeah, and not just the elite end as well. Like I've seen some of their sort of run the night, I think is what they're calling their events, which is about especially like female runners reclaiming the night as a time that they can, go run, which is really important. Like I've mentioned on our Road to Barry series, like going out on my bike with my partner because she just wants to feel safe at night, and that's not something me and Dan deal with, but that's something Soar, highlighting it's a really important issue beyond just selling running clothes, which is really nice as well. Like, shows there's real people behind Soar, I think.
They give a lot back, I think, which I've always said I never wanted to partner with a company that is not got bad morals, bad outlooks. It doesn't support like a better world. But I think Soar is definitely one of the good guys. So go check them out. I feel like if you've purchased from them, you are still you're giving back to the running community as well. So go and check them out. Enjoy the interview.
Yeah, enjoy. Hey, so we're joined today by Maurten Thomas. Maurten works for Maurten as a performance nutritionist in North America. Maurten, you've had a few other roles besides Maurten. Just looking through some of your previous jobs, you worked in the military, which is quite interesting, or worked with the military before moving to Maurten. Just looking through, I always get these wrong. Are you a registered dietitian or nutritionist? I always get them mixed up. Maybe that's a good place to start.
It's a great place to start. Yes, I am a registered dietitian. I'm a board certified sports dietitian. And that's really the credential in the US that, is a little bit more controlled than the term nutritionist. So yeah, I have a master's degree in nutrition education and have worked in the sports and performance field since joining the, nutrition world.
Yep. Perfect. Cool. Yeah, that was the way I wanted to make sure we're the right way around.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, it's very confusing with protected professions and not, isn't it? Like sports scientists, anyone can call themselves a sports scientist, and everyone can call themselves a nutritionist, right? But a dietitian,
exactly.
You've got to be a registered dietitian. Yeah. So yeah, you're the real deal, Lauren. So pleasure to have you here.
Exactly. Thank you.
And then this was going to be our first question. I've asked our first question. How do you pronounce Maurten? Because we've heard it a couple of different ways. We thought we'd clear this up as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I just got off an athlete call and they asked the same question. So I think it's pretty popular. You're pronouncing it correct, Maurten.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, I think we hear a lot of different pronunciations, and it can be a little confusing. It's a Swedish company, so get that Swedish accent.
Yeah.
Perfect. Cool. We're doing that right as well. So I think we wanted to start sort of just by going through some of the products Maurten offers, because I think that's one of the really unique things about Maurten, isn't it? Sort of where, at least my experience and probably Dan's as well, like Maurten came into the market with this really weird gel. Like I remember taking it the first time and it was, I was like, this is odd. When you're just used to those sort of like really, I don't know, like really punchy fruity gels, and then you get this thing that doesn't taste of anything and has a funny texture. I think that's I don't know if that's right, but that's maybe like the main sort of selling point, apart from the, some of the carbohydrate science behind it. But the hydrogel is a main sort of component of Maurten, right?
Maurten definitely came onto the market and you're like, this is something different, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think everyone had just sort of settled into giving out the same SIS Go gels for 30 years or whatever. And not much had changed, but I feel like Maurten was a bit of a disruptor, wasn't it? It did seem to come in and make a difference and adopted by the who's who of the endurance population, really, isn't it? So I've jumped into the question then, haven't I?
No, exactly. Happy to talk about just the uniqueness of Maurten. Again, I'm sure many people are already familiar, but it really, I think, was the first technical gel on the market versus syrup, right, that we all kind of are familiar with. But it's more of a semi-solid texture that you have to sometimes get used to. But that was because of the delivery system, right? So it's because of how it acts in the body, which is why it is that texture and why it is unflavored and there's no artificial sweeteners or anything else in there. It's really bare bones what's going to help the athlete. And you mentioned, yes, the carbohydrates, there's so many products out there that have great carbohydrates and the right ratios and the different types of carbohydrates that we know endurance athletes need. But I think what makes Maurten so unique is the innovation of the delivery of the carbohydrates. And I'm sure hydrogel being that kind of buzzword around Maurten, but people sometimes aren't sure exactly how to explain that or understand what that is. I like to compare it to a sponge and say, hey, it's a 3D matrix that soaks up those carbohydrates and transports them through the stomach smoothly and quickly. So think of it as a transport system versus necessarily anything else. And that's how we bypass the stomach and really, are able to tolerate higher levels of carbohydrates at higher paces, at higher intensities, which is what all endurance athletes really need at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean, going back to the taste thing, like we're not taking the gels for the taste, do we? I guess I'm not just snacking on them for fun. Like you said, it's getting the carbs into the system. Could you you able to give us a bit more detail on how the hydrogel is supposed to help with the absorption? Because I guess it's I think everyone knows that's the idea of a hydrogel, to help with the minimize GI distress. But what's the mechanism there? Helping to with the absorption and.
Yeah, exactly. So hydrogels have been around for a very long time and were used in the pharmaceutical industry first. So really what we did is took that concept and applied it to the sports nutrition field. So the hydrogel is made by adding alginate and pectin, so fibers that are found in seaweed and apples. And that's what creates that kind of 3D matrix that's going to trap the carbohydrates inside. And really, we see a faster gastric emptying. So again, that carbohydrates moving through the stomach quicker, being able to release into the muscles quicker because of that, trapping 3D matrix that carries it through. So your stomach is, again, it's not seeing it as a liquid. If you're drinking the drink mix, it's not going to slosh around. It's forming the gel when it hits the stomach acid. So it's pH sensitive. So it's kind of like working within the chemistry of your body. How do we use that to our advantage and use this, drug delivery system essentially, but to provide carbohydrates.
Cool. So the whole idea is just to avoid getting broken down in the stomach, is it? And getting into the GI tract as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Yep. Expediting basically that pathway.
Oh, that's cool.
And then in terms of, you've got the gels and then the drink mixes. I think the drink mixes are maybe more used in the elite side. So someone like Dan actually sometimes has the option of bottles, whereas like me, I have to carry my gels in a marathon. But the drink mixes, are they pretty much the same as the hydrogel and the gel, just a bit more watered down? Because like looking at the ingredients, it's fairly similar. Is that sort of how they work?
Yeah, very, very similar action. It's just essentially you're thinking the gel is made outside the body in the gel product, and it's made inside the body for the drink mix. So when you're going to, have the drink mix in liquid form, it's still going to be a liquid when you're drinking it, and then when it hits your stomach, it'll be that gel. So your stomach's going to see a similar thing for both of those, and it's just the method and delivery that you are, looking for to hit the goals that you have.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's because I knew the drink mix was like hydrogel technology, but that for me I was like, but how? Because it's a drink, you drink it. So how is it a gel? Like but that's I didn't realize that it gelified, I guess, when it gets into the stomach. That makes a lot of sense, because otherwise it's just a drink mix, isn't it? I don't know. No.
Exactly. And that's why, we can have that percentage so much higher of, 80 grams of carbohydrate and 500 mils versus the more typical sports drink, which is, 6 to 8% carbohydrate type of, general sports drink approach, because they're encapsulated in that hydrogel.
Cool. So one of your roles, I listened to a podcast you'd been on, and you mentioned like athlete education. And we thought that would be maybe a good sort of avenue to go down, because chances are the things that you're being asked by athletes and maybe coaches are what people that listen to this podcast might be interested in. And maybe quite a broad question, so feel free to take it wherever you want. But what are sort of kind of common themes that come up in your sort of work with athletes, and maybe without naming names, but what sort of level of athlete are you working with? Is it people sponsored by Maurten, or who are you working with as well?
Yeah, it's a range, which is why I love this position. I do support our sponsored elite professional athletes, but I also work with our major marathons and any athletes that are arriving to the Boston Marathon or you name it. So I think it is able to reach a pretty wide range of athlete ability, and you're able to go from an education, like a fueling education level of a novice to a master of fueling. And I think that's really fun, because there's people who are very dialed in that you want to specify to the perfect amount and timing. So that's kind of my role, and I think to your question, like, I usually split it up into supporting their training as well as supporting their race day. And it's just kind of a good way to break it up. And a lot of people tend to jump to race day fueling, but not necessarily tap into what they're doing day to day, because that's really at the end of the day how we're going to get the adaptations, right? Yeah. So happy to dive into one of those if either of those sound promising.
Yeah, but both of those probably. I don't know, where do we want to go first, Dan?
Yeah. Should we start with training? Because I think, like you said, I think people they always think about nutrition on race day, but actually that's when it comes to race day, that's your training's done by them, and the training is to make the biggest difference to your performance. Like obviously, race day nutrition is important, but actually, just that cumulative effect of stacking training session on training session and making sure you're getting the most out of each one of them is going to make the biggest difference to how you perform. Yeah, for whatever competition it is, your marathon or whatever. So yeah, should we start with the training? If that's all right?
Sounds great.
Yeah. I guess. Oh, sorry, Dan. You go.
Should we go a bit more specific than that, like training?
Just talk about training.
So I think we could sort of merge in some of the questions we've had from our Instagram. So thanks for those who are sending them in. But I think one of them, which I think hopefully is pretty clear to tidy up, maybe not. We'll see what you say, Lauren. But fasted training versus not fasted training for endurance performance. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
A perfect place to start. I think, when you zoom out, carbohydrates, right, are going to be our fuel source. And I am always looking to buffer an athlete's training session with proper carbohydrates before, potentially during, depending on that session, and after. And the risk of doing fasted training, sure, you can, I think an athlete will say, well, I don't feel like I need it, I don't see any downside that day, or I'll get that pushback sometimes when I'm talking about pre-fueling. But then I, always encourage an athlete to look at the volume and the load of the week. And now we start to see, well, you're not going to get the same training impact had you not fueled prior to starting, lacing up your shoes. And that's going to compound itself day after day. And now what we know is risk of injury is going to go up. And now we start to, potentially go into this energy availability equation where we're starting to get a little worried. So generally speaking, I'm always going to promote fueling up prior to a session. And that amount can vary, right? Like you're not going to need the same amount before a recovery shorter run versus a long run with intervals. Like there's differing ranges there. And I think that nuance of nutrition is really where I spend a lot of my time talking to athletes about. It's how are you changing your nutrition day to day based off of the training load that you have. So yeah, big picture, I would say, if you have goals of adaptation and getting faster and recovering better, like I would not recommend fasted training. I would recommend looking at carbohydrates in that hour, 2 hours, whatever you have beforehand. And then that also is going to help train your gut to get used to taking in carbohydrates. So there's multifacets of benefits there.
Yeah, so fuel for the work required, isn't that the phrase that goes around?
Exactly, yeah. Nailed it.
Yeah. So if you're just doing a 30-minute recovery jog, you don't need to take your Maurten gels with you probably. But if you're doing a 2-hour long run, then keep on top of that fueling before and after. Yeah. Do you think how important do you think that is? Depending upon like the training load of an athlete. So if you've got a marathon runner training twice a day every day versus someone who's actually just getting started in their running journey and they're doing 3 or 4 runs a week, but sometimes it's actually I see a mix up with the populations, and that the people are just starting out, they're actually really focusing on their nutrition and making sure everyone's fueled when they're actually only doing 2.5 hours of running a week, 2 hours of running a week, whereas the people who are doing 12, 13, 14 hours a week are the ones that have never actually thought about it necessarily as much because they've just grown up with high volumes of training.
Yeah, exactly. As duration and intensity are increasing, the carbohydrate needs are going to increase as well. So we want to be able to, we're sliding that scale up and down. I will caveat with it depends, because all dietitians always have that answer, but essentially hey, also zoom out and what is that person eating day to day? If they're not fueling well, if they're skipping breakfast and barely having lunch and whatever the case is, then maybe that pre-exercise nutrition becomes more important, even if they're not doing a very high training load, right? So it's both what is the volume and the demand of the body, but also what are they getting in on the day-to-day basis that is supporting that training just in general.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
I was going to say as well, you just mentioned, like Dan, you mentioned about, you know, taking a gel for like a 30-minute run, but something that maybe me and Dan both see like anecdotally, and especially in the UK and in club runners, is like no one takes gels on like long runs. So I'll go out and do a 2-hour long run and I'm having like 3 or 4 gels, and I might see one person take like one other gel. In maybe some of your work with the sort of more elite end of the athletes, is that becoming really big? Because I know, you know, in cycling, that's a massive thing. There was just an article the other day saying like they're 120 grams an hour for every ride. Is that something that's coming into the elite end of running as well, where, you know, if they're going over 90 minutes, are they really actually hitting the gels and drinks hard?
Yeah, I saw that article as well. It's like, wow, nutrition's really having a moment. But yeah, I do think it is starting to become more of the cultural norm, let's say, for lack of better words, in those populations to fuel properly, because you see the benefit, right? We're seeing these faster times, we're seeing these like really incredible performances, and I do think nutrition's behind some of that. And a lot of times, you know, elite athletes, they'll do anything not to get injured and stay healthy and be able to keep up with the training, because the training is obviously what's most important. So I think, you know, the trust is built, and then the culture builds around that.
Yeah.
But I think it's a work in progress. I do think it's going towards being more the norm to have fuel on you than not.
Yeah.
Which is exciting.
I think it's definitely running is lagging behind cycling though, and I don't know if it's just the ease of carrying stuff cycling versus running, or cyclists do, you know, they're more frequently doing 2, 3, 4, 5 hour rides, but the energy expenditure is also higher. The rate of energy expenditure is typically higher running than cycling. So I do think running has got some way to catch up in terms of the fueling, definitely.
Yeah, and again, you know, just anecdotally, like personally, like I feel so much better if I've had like, yeah, maybe I have some flavor fatigue, and like if you smash a load of gels during a run, like you don't want anything sweet, but you do feel a lot better. You just don't feel like you need to lie down for sort of 40 minutes afterwards. And yeah, so I personally, I think it's worth it. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see, does that sort of shift happen as you go down sort of. Yeah, like Dan said, it's easy to fuel on a bike, and then elite runners who have a coach in the car next to them, like then it's still a bit easier. And then your everyday runner that's going out for 2 hours solo when it's still dark, like it's hard to carry a lot. But
if you got some good sore running shorts, then it's easy to get gels into, isn't it? So can we dig a bit more into training and nutrition? Like how is nutrition? Like, I agree, it's really beneficial to fuel your training, but like, why is that? Like, what is it? What advantages is it giving you compared to, you know, doing every run first thing in the morning before breakfast, or having a busy day and then not fueling it? What are the benefits?
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, carbohydrate availability, I should say, is going to dictate how well you can achieve your workout, whether that's intensity or duration. And that's going to be, you know, the pace that you can hit, because it's fueling your muscles. And it's going to be the duration that you can hold that pace. So, you know, what we know is that overnight you can be depleting those carbohydrate stores that are in your body, those glycogen stores, and really be very, very minimal going into a run in the morning, especially if you're fasted. So now all of a sudden we're going to be not only breaking down muscle and potentially increasing risk of injury, but we're also looking at not being able to hit those higher intensities that rely on carbohydrates, right? So of course, like as we go higher carbohydrates, our body's going to burn primarily more carbohydrates. Higher intensity, more carbohydrates versus fat as a fuel source. So we want to be able to make sure that we can accomplish the intent of your training session. And a lot of times that's going to be driven by how much energy you have in your body. And also thinking about recovery, right? A lot of athletes are doing double sessions, double threshold sessions, you know, like all of these very demanding 24-hour days. And we're depleting those glycogen stores over and over and over again. So it's pretty critical to make sure that we are getting those carbohydrate stores back up to be able to fuel your muscle to reach the workout that you want to reach.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the things that I see misconceptions about is like how much carbohydrates people are burning. Because like when I'm testing someone in the lab, they look at their respiratory exchange ratio, but how much the difference between how much oxygen they're breathing in to how much CO2 they're breathing out, and we can calculate how much fat and carbohydrate they're burning at different intensities. And people seem to think, oh yeah, if I'm easy running, I'm burning like 80-90% fat, and it's just not true. I don't think I could count on one hand the amount of times I've seen anybody burning more than 50% fat even at their easy run pace. People are burning lots of carbohydrate, and I think there's a misconception there. But yeah, if I'm just easy running, it's just 100% fat, I didn't need to worry about fueling. I'll be fine. And then as soon as you go past your LT2, your threshold, you're 100% carbohydrates, and like most people go too hard in their sessions, so they're just burning through the carbohydrates at like ridiculous rates. So I can see it's definitely, and then like the triathletes I'm working with, some of them are doing 25-30 hours a week of training, and that becomes just a logistical challenge. I don't think runners have quite the same obstacles to overcome with their fueling. But yeah, when you're talking about that much amount of work, it's actually finding the time to eat. And if you don't eat during the training, you end up just getting in a hole. And I find that personally, I think myself, or when I'm doing, like you said, big double days, throwing a gym session as well, then by the end of the day, it's almost impossible to not be in a bit of a deficit. Almost very difficult without being super organized.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think you kind of hit on a point that it's total burn for the day too, that can get so out of hand that if you're not, even if the session maybe doesn't require a super high amount of fueling, if the needs for the day are so high, that could be an opportunity to just minimize that huge deficit between what you can take in and what you're burning through. And that's where, again, those like drink mixes or solids or like higher carb options to just get it in, because a lot of times appetite is also thrown off from heavy training, and now we're in more of a deficit and more of a trouble, right? Or it's swinging back and forth. So yeah, I think it can just help with consistency to just say, hey, I'm always going to fuel, and I can go up or down within that scale, but maybe it's going to be just a additional way to get extra calories in.
Yeah, because you spoke about it earlier, didn't you, Owain? Like if you haven't fueled during a long run and then the next day just feeling pretty awful. And I think people naturally go, oh, it's just because I did a long run, but often it's just because your glycogen depleted. You're just in a bit of a hole.
On the sort of topic of day-to-day fueling, is there any good sort of places to start for people? Maybe as a sort of early take-home message of this chat, like where should people start if they have, I don't know, concerns, or they just want to optimize this? So I would imagine the first place is to actually like keep track of what you eat, because we're like, me and Dan are doing a study at the moment where we have to write down what we're eating, and it's actually, even at the end of the day, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to remember, and also like at points I was like, what is my diet like? This is terrible. But yeah, I assume that would be somewhere to start. But are there any other sort of good ways for people to start to optimize this maybe?
Yes, that self-awareness and tracking is going to be the first thing I'll always recommend. Just, it also gives us information, right, to say like, what is a normal day like? And I also will have people jot down the timing of when they ate certain meals or snacks, because I tend to see really big gaps during the day of not fueling because of life and work and kids and family, whatever else is going on, that it kind of creates a story of saying, hey, what's the quality, the quantity, but also the timing of your food, and how do we make sure that you're not going super long spans of time? Because again, you're going to get into trouble most likely if you're in a training period. So I would also have people just start to look at, hey, what's your schedule of eating? Are you getting fuel in every 3 to 4 hours max? And where are opportunities to maybe buff that up a little bit?
Cool. Yeah. I think, to be honest, if you just start writing down what you're eating, like if you have, just like look at what you're eating and just like a bit of common sense, and that about the timing as well. That's interesting. I haven't thought about that personally as well. But yeah, I think you just write it down, you just see it on paper, and you're just like, okay, yeah, there's some changes possible here, in whatever direction that goes.
It also sometimes, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go on, Lauren, sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to add that it also can highlight, like, if somebody is always noticing that they're extra hungry at night, and then we look and they didn't support their training in the morning with proper fuel before, during, or after, depending on what that looked like that's a very common check back that I see of, you're opening up the cabinets at 9 p.m. Well, that first half of the day you took in a couple hundred calories after a whole morning of training, right? So just, again, looking at those appetite swings as well.
Are there any other markers you see, or you advise athletes to pay attention to, who are at risk of falling into that, like, low energy availability, red-S type symptoms? I guess hungry all the time.
Yeah, and that can also get tricky, though, because hunger signals you can get out of touch with very easily if it's been years of not fueling properly. So I think it's also just like body signals, like, how are you recovering? Take a look at your recovery, take a look at your soreness, take a look at your energy levels, just like both during workouts and outside of that. Also your sleep, like, is that disrupted because you're not fueling enough? Then that could be something we need to look at.
And I think maybe, we had a couple of questions again, and it's sort of around this topic. There was a few people sort of asking if it's actually, like, if it's good or if it's possible to try and lose weight whilst training for, a marathon. Another one sort of a similar, I guess, vibe is asking about, like, periodization of nutrition around, like, different, phases of training. Again, is there, like, would you ever advise someone to try and lose weight if they're training for London or Boston? Would you just be like, no, just focus on the race and then, figure that out after?
Yeah, generally my response to that is going to be, let's fuel you properly, and let your body sit where it's going to perform best. We can talk about body composition in the off season if that is something that you're focused on, but first and foremost, especially if you have a performance-based goal, like, we have to focus on fueling when you're in a training cycle. The risk of injury and underfueling and muscle damage and everything else is going to be so much higher if we're, if we're reprioritizing body composition versus performance, and the two don't, a lot of people have in their head, well, I have to be this weight or XYZ to perform well, and a lot of times that's not true. It's just a myth and a assumption. So I like to challenge that a little bit with athletes.
Yeah, I do think obviously weight makes a difference in a weight bearing sport, doesn't it? But people overestimate the amount it plays. I think you can get so much fitter by just maintaining the same weight and just doing more optimal training, can't you? And tolerating it better and responding to it better, rather than chasing the short wins. And I think that's where people fall into that trap of lighter is lighter. And we see it, we see it in athletics, we see it in cycling and triathlon. And then unfortunately, I've been involved with multiple athletes who have fall into this cycle and then inevitably perform well for a month or two, and then stress fracture for a bit of an endless cycle. Even when the fueling comes back, it's not like you fuel again and you're fixed. Like, once the damage is done a little bit, once it's done, especially if it's been long term under fueling. So yeah, I think, just like you said, supporting with training, that's going to give you a better response to it, tolerate it, and you can probably do more training instead of not being able to hit the high intensity sessions you need to, or hit the volumes you need to.
Exactly.
Go on, Owain.
I was going to say, I don't know, did you have any more sort of general day-to-day questions, Dan?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, how much, with the athletes you support, Lauren, how much do you get involved in their meal planning, and like, what level do you go down to? Is it giving like recipes? Is it going and how do you and catering for different dietary requirements, vegan, vegetarian, religious, cultural norms? I imagine it's a minefield, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly can be. I think, it's different with every athlete, the depth that they need or what they want to focus on. I generally am first looking at their training and racing, just because I want to make sure that they're getting the most out of the Maurten products, but also just like their training session and their carbohydrate availability. Like, I'm going to look at that first. But if they don't have that base of the pyramid from just your normal intake, like, we're going to look at it. I can get into the nitty gritty. Certainly prior jobs, I was, going into the recipes, the meal plans, the specifics. But I think it's athlete dependent. Some athletes have support in that world already. And I'm just here to layer in and make sure that their sports side of life is also well fueled. But yeah, we need to look at, well, do they have an iron deficiency? Do they have gluten intolerance? Do they have something else going on that's going to change their intake of nutrition throughout the day? And if so, then we need to make sure that we're coming up with ways to support that.
I had a second question and it just disappeared from my head. So yeah, do you want to cover me, Owain?
Yeah. So I think a good way to then bridge towards race day nutrition was carb loading, especially before marathons. Like, although one of the questions was, should you carb load before other races? But yeah, I think that's a nice sort of intermediate topic between day to day and race day. Yeah, I guess, yes, let's start off. Yeah, would you advise people to carb load? And when we're talking about carb loading, we're saying the sort of like 8 to 10 grams per kilo of body weight, carbohydrate intake over like sort of 24 to 48 hours before. Would you advise people to do that before other races? Obviously time dependent, but I guess what would you recommend for carb loading anyway in general? What would be your, like, for a marathon, say? And then
Yeah, exactly. I'm, again, looking at that same 8 to 10 grams per kilo, most likely 2 days out or so if you can. And that's my approach. I also find it beneficial for athletes to practice that even in their training, which seems, sometimes they're like, well, it's not race day. Why would I do it? Well, we need to make sure that you feel like first you can tolerate that amount of carbs and find the best ways to get in that amount, but also feel comfortable with it. That we want to take that variable away come race weekend. So, before your last long run, are you practicing kind of at least increasing that carbohydrates to close to that and knowing what that feels like and how you're going to tolerate it? And yeah, I think if athletes are doing a race that's 90 minutes or more, like, we should be looking at saturating those glycogen stores. Maybe it's not going to be as critical as a extra longer race or whatever it might be, but certainly there's no downside of being saturated with your energy stores going into a race that's important to you and a race that you've trained for.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Practice it. Like, you just need to figure out what you're going to eat, because I've had people say like porridge, and then I tried porridge and that's horrible. Like, it's such a bad food to be trying to have during a carb load, and often as well you're not necessarily at home when you're doing it when it really matters. Dan recently was in Spain, like, so if you know roughly what you need to go to get those carbohydrates in, it just relieves so much stress in a really stressful period as well.
Exactly. And when you're trying to minimize stress, I find beverages are so helpful for carb loading. It sounds like you guys have played around with that too, but just because in terms of the volume, you're not feeling like you're just eating all day. But like having a higher carb mix, like the Maurten Drink Mix 320, for example, it's 80 grams of carb. You can sip on that in 16 ounces and get a pretty significant amount. And then if you have one or two of those a day, and then you have some higher carb snacks, like, you're going to get closer without even feeling like you added to your meals. So just finding ways, even if it's orange juices, beverages, I think can be really helpful for an athlete who's like, how the heck am I going to get 500, 600 plus grams, of carbohydrate when I'm not used to taking in anything near that?
Yeah. I mean, I've sort of tried to dial this in the last few marathons I've done, and I've found also like a low residue diet helpful as well, to sort of I was often having GI distress on race day, and I won't go into the details there. But yeah, just finding, I think, like you said, going for drinks is really helpful. Haribo is one I go to for mine. For me, I find that's a good way to, a bag of Haribo. You've got quite a lot of carbs in there.
I was going to say seafood paella as well the last few times.
Yes, well, I was in Valencia, so you got to go for seafood paella. And once I've done it once and it works, you've got to go back. I went back to exactly the same restaurant because why not? But like rice is good. Maybe the seafood's a bit dicey, but you've got to live life on the edge a little bit, haven't you? So yeah.
One other question with the carb load as well that we had, and it's maybe a more old school approach, but do you ever recommend doing like a depletion before, so carbohydrate depletion now?
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I don't. I think at this point we can trust that the need isn't really there. And again, like your training that week is different. Your demand isn't as high. Like if we just start to slowly bring them up, I haven't seen convincing evidence that is like a necessary step in the carb loading process.
Yeah, I mean, for people who haven't heard about this, I think, was it big in the 90s? I don't know.
80s and 90s, I think, those marathoners, yeah.
You'd basically do a big long run, wouldn't you, on a Sunday, and not eat anything, basically avoid carbs for like 2 or 3 days, probably feel horrendous, and then the last 2 or 3 days go really, really heavy on the carbs. I mean, that's a way, you feel awful on taper week anyway, don't you, for a week of a marathon, but if you want to make it even worse, that's probably a good recipe for doing it, isn't it? Just doing your last little taper session on a Wednesday or Thursday, completely carb depleted. That's going to give you no confidence, is it?
And setting back your recovery, right? Like it just seems, kind of counterintuitive when you start to think about it.
I think it was probably I think it was like a one-off research paper or something saying, this is the way to do it. And research is, you can't just rely on one research paper in isolation, can you? And
with the carb load as well, just because I think it's commonly maybe a mistake people make. Would you ever start that more than 2 days out from the marathon or already?
I'll have athletes pay attention to their carb intake all week, honestly. It doesn't mean they have to ramp it up to that level, but I still want it to be at the forefront of their mind, just adequate, proper fueling in the days leading up to that. I don't think you need to do a 5-day 10 gram per kilo load. I don't think you're going to feel very good doing something like that. But 2 days out, prior to that, let's just make sure you're getting adequate, good quality carbohydrates, food, balance, etc. And you're probably not training super hard anyway. So that's probably, already a little bit more that is being stored that can set you up for success there. That's my approach.
Yeah. I think it's maybe comes more from like the ultramarathon world. Like I've seen people talk about starting like 7 days out, and yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah.
And so bad, so bloated and
exactly. And if you're trying to get in that much, you're cutting back on other foods, right? So you're probably not getting much fruits, vegetables, protein, fats, like all these other things that are important for daily life and recovery and everything else. So I don't know. I think that would be challenging.
Yeah. So I guess we've arrived at race day. We talk maybe about race day nutrition as well. I guess maybe the first question I had was in running, at least, because obviously, like we said, cycling's a bit different. Like you can generally intake a lot more, but do you think there maybe is an upper limit of grams per hour of carbs, or do you think it's get as many as you can? And if you can tolerate over 100 grams an hour, like keep pushing it, sort of thing. But is that maybe the approach you'd take?
It depends question, I think.
Depends on the athlete, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's tricky because I think people will automatically want to do the most amount of carbohydrates that they can tolerate and that they can take in. But do we know if they're oxidizing and utilizing all of that carbohydrate? I don't know, is this an elite athlete or is this a first time marathoner? I don't know. So I think it runs the gamut there of, yes, if you feel good taking over 90 grams an hour and you are a trained, kind of marathoner who has really dialed this in and you feel good doing it, I would just say, make sure you've done it at race pace. Make sure you've done 100 and plus grams in the heat. You've done it at these different environments, because that also is going to change how your body is utilizing all of that carbohydrate. So I would put a little asterisk next to going over 90 grams an hour and say, like, first, do you need to? Second, are you going to feel good given the circumstances of the race? And then we go from there. It's a little more nuanced than just saying, yeah, get as many as you can all the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's very hard, because there are ways that you can go about measuring, aren't it? How much you are oxidizing. Using, I think, no, is it I can't remember his name now. Is it Jamie Pugh at Liverpool? John Moore, I'm pretty sure. He's they do the carbon isotoping, and then you can looking at the breath samples, and measuring how much you're absorbing. But unless you've got access to that very, very skilled bit of kit and equipment and knowledge, then you're sort of guessing, aren't you? Because I mean, I've managed to ramp up how much I take in during a marathon over my marathon career, if you want to call it a career. And I think I worked out in Valencia where around 2:12. I did take on 110 grams an hour, but then I threw up all over the finish line. So I probably wasn't absorbing all that, was I? I didn't feel any distress during the marathon, but then obviously wasn't being absorbed, at least in the back end of a race, if it was all ended up on the carpet. So so maybe I should stick to 90. But it's the thing, isn't it? Like I think 90 is with the athletes I coach, I say try and get to 90, and if that's probably good enough, it must be very minimal how much more benefit you're getting. Like 60 versus 90 is very different to 90 versus 120. I would suggest.
Absolutely. Yep, exactly. And again, it's like, if you can train with 90, and then even if in the race you're getting 80, but it's higher intensity and you're pushing yourself and it's warmer, maybe that's okay, because your body has adapted to getting even more, and then given these other factors, it can tolerate the 80. So it's always like a little bit of a give and take of what's the situation around the race and what the athlete has trained with, and the importance of training that fueling and building up to something like 110 or whatever you did in Spain. Like that takes time.
Oh yeah, I think when I was I think my first marathon, I was using we'll probably get onto it in a bit, but like a single source carbohydrate gel, and I won't name a brand, but I think I only took on 60 grams an hour and didn't tolerate that very well at all. Whereas having practiced it in training, using a better fueling product, I can, I've definitely managed to tolerate much, much higher levels now, which is, like I said, a combination of training the gut and also choosing the right nutrition products.
I think that's as good a segue as we're going to get into what's in the gels, right? Like that's been the game changer, and that's part apart from the hydrogel, that's maybe again what Maurten sort of brought into the market, isn't it? Right, like the combination of carbohydrates. Maurten, I'm just getting it here. It's maltodextrin. Getting that right, aren't I? Maltodextrin and fructose. But other brands are going to use different combinations. Are you able to just explain maybe why that combination works? Why that's a really key factor?
Yes, it's such a key factor for anyone who's looking to fuel really over that 60 grams an hour, right? And that's essentially because of our human bodies and our intestines and the way we transport carbohydrates. And big picture, we have a transporter that is going to get fully saturated when you use a glucose only type of product, right? So it's one single source type of carbohydrate and sugar that your body is shuttling in and out. And that transporter is going to get saturated once you hit a certain number. And we see that around that 60 grams of glucose. And then what we've discovered as the demand for carbohydrate gets higher in longer duration, higher intensity, et cetera, we can utilize another transporter, and that's that fructose transporter. And that, we're looking at probably around that 30 gram an hour ish. I don't think we know that's exactly the upper limit, right? We're still learning. And that's also why we're seeing, wow, some athletes can tolerate even more. But when we add the 60 from the glucose saturated and the 30 from, the fructose transporter, it's like I like use the analogy of just like two school buses that are completely full that are moving in, instead of just one. And then we have all this leftover that's just going to sit there and not be utilized. So always looking at a product and making sure it does have dual fuels, carbohydrate sources, if you are looking to fuel something that's, again, something like a marathon.
Yeah, because one of our questions was, can you just use table sugar? Is that all right? Can you just do that? And I think hopefully we've answered that question, that you can't just pour sugar into and mix it with some water, regardless of a hydrogel technology. That's still not a great idea. I guess I've got to jog my memory back to my biochemistry days, but maltodextrin is just two glucose molecules stuck together, right? Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a glucose. Yep, glucose based.
Nice. So yeah, I think it's definitely worth checking whatever product you're using, because even there's still products out there which are single source glucose.
Tons. Like having worked in a running store, like most of it is single source. I think apart from reading the packaging on the back and checking what the ingredients are, generally the dual source gels are more expensive. Like that's generally it. Like in the UK, at least for our UK listeners, you'll find the single source ones in Tesco and Lidl. The dual source probably aren't gonna. I'd be really surprised if I saw Maurten in Tesco.
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
Yeah.
Don't think. Yeah.
You'll definitely have made it then if you get into Tesco. Yeah. But yeah. Typically it's glucose, fructose, or maltodextrin and fructose, isn't it? I've seen a few papers looked at. I can't remember trying to do a third source of sugar. I can't remember what they were experimenting with now though. I can't think.
Sure.
Never mind. We'll move on. So I guess galactose. Yeah, that's a good prompt there. But it's hard to know what can you maximize the transporters. How many can you? I'm at the limits of my GI physiology, but you've got multiple glucose transporters, which is why you can get on glucose and fructose, like GLUT1 and GLUT2 potentially. I'd have to go check that. They obviously saturate different points. Maybe there are other sources we could use. I guess this is probably a bit of a throw out there, but ketones is that the next big thing? Fueling for performance, fueling for marathons.
Oof. Lots of questions about ketones. I would say, right now there's no reason to ignore the carbohydrates first. Let's look at what the research shows, and that is still that carbs are going to be king in terms of fueling endurance exercise. I think there's interesting research on recovery maybe in the ketone space, but I haven't, seen anything that's going to say during racing this is going to be the key to changing your performance. And when you think about physiology, it doesn't make a ton of sense to outweigh a carbohydrate based fuel plan. But that's, maybe I'm biased.
No, I agree. I mean, I've not seen anything that convincing on ketones. A lot of marketing. But then you compare the research to carbohydrate. Well, you're not going to find a scientist who says, oh yeah, you're going to run a faster marathon without taking on carbohydrate. That's just there's not going to be a single study where it finds carbohydrates for a marathon or for anything long duration not effective. It's pretty clear cut there. If you're going for easy wins and things are going to work, then don't spend £100 a dose on ketones and get some good Maurten gels.
And what sort of like race, like during race nutrition do you suggest with like sort of more the elite sides for things shorter than the marathon? Yeah, so I guess maybe it's easier to break it down by like time, I guess, sort of like the 60-minute and the 30-minute sort of race distances. Like, are you still suggesting to them like take something, or is it really have something before the start and then you're good to get through?
I would say big picture, you're probably looking at really focusing on the pre and the start, and that gel you're about to take 5-10 minutes before the start of the race is going to become even more important if it's, a under 60-minute race, let's say, for example. Potentially there's opportunity for some drink mix or something in there depending on the environment, but I would say I'm looking more pre-race for those shorter races. But it doesn't mean that carbohydrates are less important. It just means that, hey, if you've done a good job fueling up prior, you're gonna have available fuel in your body for that. So but I do recommend generally, like, hey, do you need a gel or an easily accessible carbohydrate source in those 15 minutes prior to towing the line?
Yeah. So I guess like if there was a camera in the cool room at the Olympics before the 5,000 final, would we actually be expecting to see people like having a Maurten drink mix? Would that be something that's happening?
Yeah. I think drink mix and gels are, again, just such an easy way to get in those carbohydrates pre-exercise and so easy on the stomach there.
And then I think one other sort of theme that came up in the questions was asking about like electrolytes during events. And I think I'm right in saying, there's some salt and there's some sodium in Maurten products, but there's not really any. I don't think there's any other electrolytes in the products. Am I right in saying? So is that something that again you would ever sort of be thinking about again with your sort of athlete education work? Like, is that coming up or not really? Just eat a balanced diet and then race day is race day.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it certainly comes up as topics of conversation. I think the marketing of the importance of electrolytes is very, very strong right now. And not to say they're not important, but I would say if somebody is eating, if we're working on their diet and we're looking at their general intake and they're eating a balanced diet, they're probably getting what they need through that, as long as, again, they're eating enough and eating a variety of foods. That's generally not a topic that I'm worried about. If we're looking
people
at
are obsessed with electrolytes, aren't they? Obsessed with electrolytes, and how much salt is in a general person's diet? Probably too much. And the association with cramping and electrolytes is really poor as well. We've talked a bit about that before. Yeah, I mean, I've never taken electrolytes during a marathon, and very rarely in training either. Isn't it something nice to stick one of those tabs in a drink because it feels a bit refreshing and a bit of flavor? But other than that,
yeah, I'm always referencing, some studies coming out of Alan McCubbin's lab and saying like, we don't, like maybe we rethink some of this focus, because what I don't want is athletes to focus on only getting electrolytes when they're missing the carbohydrates, because they're like, well, I have this electrolyte drink. It's like we're doing different things here. We need to not lose the forest of the trees.
How important do you think, if we go back to the marathon example, like the frequency is important? So you could take 90 grams an hour in multiple ways. Like you could take literally 90 grams every hour versus breaking up. I guess most people are taking gels because it's easy to carry around versus drink mix. So you're sort of limited by the gels are 40. There's 25. Are there 25 and 40 gram Maurten gels? Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So
correct.
You got some. You can. What would you, if in an ideal world, what would you say to someone who's gonna take gels? Would you go 2 40-gram gels or 4 roughly 25-gram gels?
Yeah, I'm usually recommending between every 5 and 6K they're getting a gel in, and that's probably a 25-gram gel just based off of what they can tolerate. But if it's more a logistical problem, then we're looking at the gel 160s, the 40 grams, and a little bit more spaced out. But I think there's something to be said for that consistency from the very beginning. And that's another thing I'll see, maybe athletes who are in their beginning careers of fueling, not fuel till halfway through, or not really take anything till they feel like they need it. And we want to start within that first 5-6K, we're trying to get in a gel already, because we're trying to stay ahead of that depletion. So yeah, I would say that consistency is going to be a lot more effective than waiting until halfway or later on and taking several gels at once.
The other thing is we're more efficient, we're more economical burning carbohydrates than fat. So actually, I think it's a bit counterintuitive marathon nutrition, and that you don't want to burn through your glycogen before you get to the finish line, but you actually want to oxidize as much carbohydrates as you can, because if you're burning if you're going to get through 100 calories a minute or whatever, or 100 calories, this is awful numbers here. If you're going to burn through the amount of energy you need in fat versus carbohydrate, you're going to need more oxygen to burn that fat, and that's going to raise the exercise intensity, and that's going to mean you fatigue quicker. So you're better off getting oxidizing as much carbohydrates, relying as much on carbohydrates as you can, with the caveat you don't hit the wall and completely become glycogen depleted and have to walk the last 10K. I guess another reason to start fueling early is just keep the fire burning with carbs.
Exactly. I think it's also super interesting that when you start to compare the amount of carb taken in a marathon, you really start to see the difference after that halfway mark of if you fueled with 30 grams an hour versus 60 plus 70 grams an hour, right? Like, you're not necessarily going to feel it in that first half, but you have to trust that that second half is going to look very, very different should you be getting in a more adequate amount to meet that need. And that's where you can start to really dial in with athletes where they're feeling maybe the deficit of not enough carbohydrate intake.
Nice. You want to go on, sorry, I'll let you talk.
I was going to say I had a couple more questions. I don't know how many more you had, Dan. I was going to say one of the questions we had in, which I think is a good one, is what do you think are sort of maybe some upcoming trends that might maybe hit the mainstream? I guess like we can refer back to that cycling article. I think that's really that's piqued some interest, and maybe we already sort of knew that was going on. That we've heard that that's been mentioned, but that article maybe hit the sort of mainstream. Do you think there's anything like that might?
Yeah, what's the future trends of sports nutrition, and I guess that could be Maurten or other companies. I know I guess we can rule out bicarbs. We're going to do a specific episode on that. That's definitely a hot topic at the minute. But that
was going to be my answer.
Sorry, I've stolen it. Yeah, I get. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts on bicarb and what where do you think that's going to go?
Yeah, I think, and I'll save that for your next discussion, but yeah, I think that is what's coming up more often in conversations. I think it's getting attention now that there is a delivery system of how to handle that sodium bicarb without the GI side effect, and now we're starting to learn more as well. So not only are more athletes using it, but the research is able to be done because athletes aren't running to the bathroom, so we can actually see the effects of what sodium bicarb can do, especially in those longer endurance activities that I think, generally speaking, in the past we were like, well, if it's over 15 minutes, why are you doing it, right? And now we're starting to get a lot more interesting data come through. So I think that would be my answer in terms of just like what is becoming maybe more popular, but also allowing for more research, and hopefully we can all learn as we test more athletes.
Yeah, because I think we can talk about bicarb a bit, definitely, because people love it at the minute. So you've effectively taken bicarb, which we know is a performance enhancing supplement, and we've known about that since the 80s at least, but it helps with the buffering of blood pH and allows us to tolerate higher acidity levels and work at higher intensities. But you've packaged that, which came with loads of GI distress, and you're either throwing up or running to the toilet to come out the other end. With your hydrogel technology, and that seems to be a pretty winning combination from anecdotally what I hear people say from some good papers that have been done now. And I do think it's really exciting to see actually what is the potential of bicarb in not just racing a 400 meters, racing an 800 meters, where I think it was most popular pre Maurten.
Yep, exactly. I think just being able to have those, have the sodium bicarb essentially bypass the stomach, just like the carbohydrates do, really allows for us to hit the dosing that the athlete needs, because that's going to be important in how much the blood bicarbonate is going to rise. And nailing down the timing and making sure essentially just we have a little bit more control now of saying this is the way that we're seeing it act in the body, so you can really dial it in and now apply it to a race of maybe a longer distance.
Yeah, I think it's it'll be really exciting to see the research continue. And I'm thinking more about stochastic type, not necessarily running, which is pretty much you hold a constant effort as long as you can in most situations, but certainly in cycling where you put in a big surge and then actually you might ride quite easy for 30-40 minutes and then put in another effort. What's the effect there? And even team sports, I can see a massive role for that in football, soccer, rugby, where you are doing repeated really high intensity bouts and then recovering. And I think one of the marketing things with the Maurten bicarb is that it stays in the system a lot longer as well. It's not just actually the half-life in the blood is quite high, which means it stays active. You don't need to keep topping it up, and it's not just going to be out of the system within half an hour of intaking it. So that'll be exciting to see. Yeah, I think a lot of potential, and I still think certainly in the UK we're at the point where people are interested and curious, but haven't quite committed to taking it necessarily or buying it. And I think it's still on the upward. I think we haven't hit peak bicarb yet. That'll be interesting. Yeah, interesting to see what direction that goes.
I think maybe one more question might be a nice way to wrap this up. What do you have any good go-to sources or places to get information? And maybe you are looking at the research, so that's maybe a bit too in depth, but you mentioned Alan McCubbin. I know he has a podcast called The Long Munch, which is really good. I'd really recommend that if people are interested in nutrition. But do you have any sort of other good resources or places to learn a bit more maybe?
Because there's so much bad stuff out there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Where do you actually go? Where should you actually go for evidence-based facts rather than what people think?
Yeah, lots of conflicting information out there. So appreciate you guys going through and highlighting the science behind these things for the listener. I think the Fueling Endurance podcast is great. I would say my Sport Science is a great just online portal as well. So I am mostly looking at the research, so it's hard to think off the top of my head what are those kind of go-tos.
We've both been playing around with the Maurten bicarb, and you pointed out that there's actually a really nice information QR code associated with that, isn't there, Owain, where it gives you right, you need to have it at this time, this is the dose you should be taking, how should your nutrition look out around taking that, which we found really helpful for actually knowing when should you take it, because actually still you want to get the most bang for your buck, don't you? And I'm not sure if it's similar for fueling. I've seen presentations before. I was in the Berlin Marathon. I was pacing the Berlin Marathon, but saw the elite. The pre-race meeting, and there was someone from Maurten there saying, okay, this is, if you haven't thought about it already, which you hopefully should do, this is the sort of frequency you should be taking your gels, and maybe when should you have a caffeine gel, and etc. And that was really helpful. Nice. Any other questions, Owain?
I think that was it for me. I think that's a good place to to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming on, Lauren. I've really enjoyed hearing from you and getting some really good insights. And I'm sure our listeners have as well. And thank you for answering all of their questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lauren.
Thanks so much for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Lauren Thomas from Maurten for coming on the podcast. We really hope you enjoyed that interview. That's our first guest on the podcast, so breaking new ground for us. But thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you all next time.